The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, indifferent to the chaos that had just torn our world apart. I sat in the unforgiving plastic chair beside Emily's hospital bed, her pale face barely visible beneath a tangle of tubes and bruises. Machines hummed and beeped steadily, each sound anchoring me to the brutal reality I couldn't escape. My daughter, my little girl, was broken, and I couldn't fix her. Melissa sat across from me, stiff and silent, her eyes locked on the rhythmic rise and fall of Emily's chest. Her hands, always so expressive, were clasped tightly in her lap, white-knuckled. She hadn't cried. Not since the ER doctor first told us they had revived Emily twice on the way in. Not when they said internal bleeding. Not even when they took her into surgery. She just sat, unmoving, like grief hadn't quite reached her yet, or like it already had and calcified. The clock on the wall ticked too slowly. I had called her name a few times, Melissa, but she only nodded or offered a brittle "Mem." I didn't push. We were both unraveling in our own ways, and for now, being near Emily was all that mattered. It was a miracle she'd made it out of that twisted wreckage alive. The paramedics had said as much when they found her pinned behind the wheel, blood everywhere. I had arrived at the scene just minutes after the call, breathless, trembling, useless. Now, hours later, I watched her sleep under sedation, fighting to stay in this world. There were stitches on her temple, bandages on her arms, and a deep purple bruise blooming across her collarbone. It killed me. A part of me still hoped I would wake up from this nightmare and find her home, sprawled across the couch, earbuds in, complaining about homework. Melissa finally spoke, her voice hoarse like she hadn't used it in days. "The doctor said she'll be in and out for a while. They don't know about the memory damage yet." I nodded. "She's strong. She shouldn't have had to be." That silenced me. There was blame in her voice, even if she didn't say it outright. I felt it, thick and invisible, hanging between us like smoke. Maybe it was my fault. I had let her take the car. I hadn't noticed the signs. I'd been too buried in work and responsibility to see what was slipping through the cracks. I leaned forward and brushed a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. Her skin was cold beneath my fingertips, but the pulse on the monitor told me she was still fighting. Then Melissa said it, softly, like a confession wrapped in frost. "When this is over, I'm leaving you." I turned to look at her, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She just kept staring at our daughter. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Not with Emily between us, still trying to live. I didn't turn my head right away. I heard her say it, every word crisp and deliberate, but my brain refused to accept it. As if, by not reacting, I could pretend it hadn't happened. That I'd misunderstood. That stress and sleeplessness had distorted her voice into something cruel. "When this is over, I'm leaving you." The words echoed in my skull, louder the second time, even though she hadn't repeated them. My hand was still on Emily's, her fingers limp in mine. Melissa sat on the edge of the chair across from me, eyes fixed on the floor now, not on our daughter. Not on me. I glanced over slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, as though if I startled her, she might actually get up and walk out right then and there. Her face was blank, unreadable. I had known that face for 20 years. I had watched it change with joy, sorrow, love, even rage. But this expression, this nothingness, was new. It scared me more than her words. "Melissa," my voice barely registered. I wasn't even sure what I meant to say. "What do you mean? Why now? Are you serious?" But I said none of it. Just her name, fragile and useless. She shifted slightly, never looking at me. "Not now. This isn't the time." No, it wasn't. But she had made it the time, hadn't she? Emily stirred, a small twitch in her leg. I immediately leaned forward, focusing all my attention on that tiny movement like it was the only thing keeping me anchored. Melissa didn't react. Maybe she hadn't noticed. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. I wanted to scream. Not at her. Not in anger. Just to let something out before it tore me open from the inside. But I didn't. I stayed quiet. For Emily, she was the only thing that mattered now. We sat like that for what felt like hours, her staring at the floor, me pretending I hadn't just watched my life quietly collapse at my feet. Every breath in that room was heavier than the last. The machines beeped on, indifferent to the quiet storm brewing beside them. A nurse entered at one point to check Emily's for. She smiled softly, said nothing about the tension that wrapped itself around the room like barbed wire. When she left, the silence returned, thicker than before. Melissa finally stood. She brushed invisible dust from her jeans, smoothed her sweater, and walked toward the hallway without a word. I watched her go, part of me hoping she'd stop at the door. Look back. Say something. She didn't. I turned back to Emily. Her chest rose and fell in that steady, mechanical rhythm. She was still here. I wasn't about to let her wake up into a broken world. Not if I could help it. Looking back, it didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to notice. An explosion, a fight, a slammed door. But it was more like erosion. Quiet, slow, disguised as routine. I think I started losing Melissa long before she ever admitted she was leaving. Maybe even before Emily's accident. Maybe I'd already lost her, and I just hadn't wanted to see it. She started working late more often about a year ago. At first, it made sense. The nonprofit was understaffed, the grant deadlines relentless. I'd nod when she said, "Don't wait up," and I didn't. Most nights, I was neck-deep in quarterly reports or zoning approvals anyway. I was building something, for us, I told myself. For Emily's college. For our future. But I didn't notice that somewhere in all my building, I had stopped checking what she was still willing to carry. Dinner as a family became an occasional thing. She said she wasn't hungry. Or she'd already eaten. Or she had a board call. I'd shrug, set her plate aside, eat with Emily, and try to ignore the silence where Melissa's voice used to be. I figured it was a phase. Stress. A rut. Every couple hits one, right? She stopped asking about my day. That one stung more than I admitted. Melissa used to ask even when she already knew. I'd tell her anyway. The smallest things. She used to listen like they mattered. But lately, when I spoke, her eyes glazed over, or her fingers kept tapping at her phone. She'd nod, but not here. I started talking less. The night she missed Emily's school recital was when I first felt something sharp in my chest. Emily had been looking for her in the crowd all evening, scanning every row while trying to keep her smile in place. Afterward, when I told her mom had an emergency meeting, she didn't even react. She just nodded. She already knew. I worked too much. I know that. I told myself it was noble, that providing was the same as being present. But looking at my daughter, bandaged and fragile in that hospital bed, I realized how much I'd missed while I was trying to give them everything. Melissa hadn't just drifted away. I had made it easy for her to. There were signs, so many signs. Her coldness in bed. The way she didn't reach for my hand anymore. The forced laughs. The fake smiles. I ignored them, convinced that if I just held on tighter, she'd come back. She didn't. She was already gone. I just hadn't opened my eyes wide enough to see it. Emily stirred just after sunrise, a soft flutter of her fingers against the starched white sheets. I was there, half asleep in the same chair I hadn't left all night. The quiet rustle pulled me up fast, heart stuttering in my chest. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy and slow, before settling open. Her eyes, tired, clouded, found mine. "Dad?" she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm here," I said, leaning in, my hand already reaching for hers. "I'm right here, sweetheart." She tried to smile, but it faded almost immediately, pain tugging at the corners of her mouth. "What happened?" "You were in an accident," I said gently. "But you're okay. You're safe now." Her gaze drifted across the room, as if looking for something or someone. Then her eyebrows knit together. "Where's Mom?" "She stepped out for a bit." I lied. I didn't know where Melissa was, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure I cared. Emily nodded slowly, her head barely moving against the pillow. Her fingers tightened just slightly around mine. "You two were fighting," she said. It wasn't a question. I hesitated. "We're going through something. But we're here for you. That's what matters." She was quiet a moment, her breath shallow, eyes blinking in slow motion. "I heard you. In the hallway. At the house last week." A pause. "She said things." I swallowed hard, throat dry. "You don't have to worry about that right now. Just focus on healing." But she didn't let it go. Her voice dropped, not just in volume but weight. "I didn't want to tell you, but Mom, she's not who you think she is. It hit like a punch to the ribs. Not what she said, but how she said it. Quiet. Sad. Like she'd been carrying it for too long. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. Emily looked away, eyes fixed on the ceiling like she was trying to decide how much to say, or whether to say anything at all. "She's been different. With me. With everything." She exhaled, slow and strained. "I saw messages once. On her laptop. From someone named Tom. She closed it fast and said it was work. But I don't think it was." The name landed like ice water down my spine. Tom. My business partner. My friend. Before I could speak, her eyelids began to droop again, the effort of speaking pulling her back towards sleep. "I just thought you should know," she murmured. And then she was out. I sat there, stunned, my daughter's words still echoing in my head. Not who you think she is. Maybe she never was. Melissa had returned sometime around midnight, slipping silently into the hospital room, like guilt was trailing behind her. She didn't say where she'd been. I didn't ask. She sat in the chair across from mine and stared blankly at the floor until her eyes finally gave into sleep. Her head lolled against the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if even unconscious she was guarding something. Emily was resting, the machine steady and calm for once. It should have been a peaceful moment. But peace had become a foreign thing lately, something that hovered just out of reach. And that sentence Emily had whispered before falling back asleep wouldn't stop circling in my head. "Mom, she's not who you think she is." I sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the machines, Melissa's shallow breathing, my own thoughts thudding like drums. Her phone sat beside her on the windowsill, screen dim but unlocked, careless. Or maybe confident I wouldn't dare. I reached for it. My hand hesitated in the air for a second too long, conscience flaring up like a match, warning me not to do this. But then I remembered Emily's face, the bruises, the way her voice had cracked when she said the name Tom. And suddenly, doing nothing felt worse than knowing. I opened the messaging app. The thread was right at the top. Tom. No fake name. No disguise. Just Tom. My best friend. My partner of 15 years. A man who'd held Emily when she was born. Who'd been the best man in our wedding. There were hundreds of messages. Some flirty. Some graphic. Some emotional in ways that made my stomach turn. "You make me feel alive again. He doesn't see me anymore. Soon, baby. Just hold on." Then photos. Then talk of weekends. Secret meetings. A hotel room 3 blocks from the office. And then, worse, talk of me. "He's clueless. I've been slowly moving things over. He hasn't noticed. Once Emily's stable, I'm done pretending." I scrolled and scrolled until my eyes blurred and my hands shook. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but that would wake her. That would start something I wasn't ready for. Not here, not now, not in this room where our daughter lay fighting for her life. I put the phone back, exactly where it had been. Melissa stirred slightly but didn't wake. I sat back in my chair, every part of me buzzing with betrayal. Not just the affair. Not just the lies. But who it was. Tom. Of all people. Emily's monitor beeped softly beside me, still steady. Still alive. I glanced at Melissa, sleeping like she hadn't just destroyed 2 decades of trust. And I realized then, I didn't know this woman anymore. I wasn't sure I ever really had. The next morning, Melissa brought coffee like nothing had happened. One for me, one for her. Just like always. She even smiled, soft and hollow, as if she were still pretending to be my wife, still playing house in the waiting room of a hospital where our daughter lay stitched together. I took the cup without looking at her and muttered a thanks I didn't mean. She sat beside me, sipping quietly, scrolling through her phone, probably checking in with Tom while I sat inches away, knowing too much and saying nothing. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Not while Emily was still fragile and full of wires. Not when every scream might echo back to her bedside. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. I'd spent years navigating tense boardrooms and cold negotiations. I could manage this. I would manage this. That afternoon, I stepped out under the pretense of grabbing clothes from home. Instead, I drove straight to the office and locked the door behind me. It felt surreal, like I was sneaking around in my own life, trying to catch a ghost I'd already seen. I opened our shared business laptop and pulled the logs. Transfers. Accounts. Password changes I hadn't authorized. Everything I had once trusted her with was sitting there, twisted and red-flagged. She hadn't just betrayed our marriage. She'd been siphoning money, quietly, consistently. A few thousand here, a couple wire transfers there. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to make sure she could walk away standing. I printed everything. Later that day, I called a lawyer, Carolyn Bergman. Family law. Discreet. She answered on the third ring, her voice clipped but calm. I didn't give her every detail. Just enough. Carolyn listened. Asked smart questions. Told me what I already suspected. If I had the messages, the logs, the documentation, then Melissa was building a life behind my back, and I was well within my rights to stop her from taking mine with her. That night, I sat beside Emily again, watching her sleep, her face still bruised but peaceful for the first time in days. Melissa dozed in the chair across from me, her phone resting on her stomach, just like before. I didn't touch it this time. I didn't need to. I had what I needed. The calm in that room was a lie, thin and fragile. A glass sheet stretched too far. I could feel the cracks. One wrong step, and it would shatter. But I wouldn't be the one to scream first. That honor belonged to Melissa. And soon, very soon, she would. The bruises on Emily's face had begun to fade, softening from angry purple to pale yellow, like storm clouds clearing. Her voice was stronger, her appetite returning in pieces. Half a cup of applesauce, a bite of toast, a weak smile when I made some dumb joke just to hear her laugh. It felt like watching a flower unfold in slow motion after the frost had nearly taken it. She was healing. And in that healing, cracks began to open. It was the third evening after her surgery when she asked me to close the door. Melissa had stepped out for air, a ritual that had become more frequent, and Emily waited until the hallway was silent before speaking. "Dad," she said quietly, "can I tell you something without you freaking out?" I nodded, even though something inside me immediately braced. "Always." She twisted the corner of her blanket between her fingers. "That night, before the accident, I wasn't just out with friends." I leaned in gently. "Okay. I was home early. You were at work. Mom didn't know I was there." Her voice dropped further, eyes fixed on the blanket. "I went to her office looking for the charger she took from me. Her laptop was open." My stomach turned, already knowing where this was going. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. "But something popped up, a message from Tom. I didn't even read all of it. Just a few lines." "What did it say?" She hesitated. "Stuff about leaving. About how it would be easier after me." She blinked fast, her throat tightening. "He called me the obstacle. Said you'd be too distracted with me in the hospital to notice anything." I felt cold all over. I freaked out. I slammed the laptop shut and ran out. Got in the car even though I shouldn't have. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know where I was going. I was just trying to get away." My heart broke open all over again. "Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. You hear me? None of it." She nodded, but her eyes stayed down. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to be the reason you and Mom." "You're not," I said firmly. "You were never the reason. You were the one holding us together." Her lip quivered, and I took her hand. We stayed like that for a long time. There was no more pretending after that. No more illusions that Melissa's betrayal hadn't left shrapnel in both of us. Emily had known more than she ever should have, and it had almost cost her everything. But now, truth sat between us, heavy and undeniable, and somehow, in its weight, we both felt lighter. It started with a name I didn't recognize. A small transfer, $1, $200 to an account labeled Emmy Holdings, tucked into the monthly report like it didn't matter. I almost missed it. Could have chalked it up to a contractor, or a business expense Melissa forgot to flag. But something about it nagged at me. Emmy. Those were Melissa's initials. That part was easy. But the rest? It didn't sit right. I waited until the hospital room was quiet again, Melissa asleep in the corner, Emily dozing with the television low. I slid out into the hallway and pulled up our cloud finance system from my phone, fingers moving faster than my breath could keep up. The transfer wasn't a one-time thing. There were more, dozens, hidden across multiple months. Small amounts at first. $600 here, $800 there. Just enough to dodge suspicion. Then, after the new year, the number started climbing. $5,000 in February. $7,200 in March. A quiet, calculated drain on the business we built together. She hadn't even tried to hide it well. That's what stunned me most. No offshore shell companies, no third-party names. Just a basic holding account opened 6 months ago under her maiden name and masked as a vendor expense. She was gambling on me not looking closely, on me trusting her. And for months, she'd been right. I felt the air tighten around me as I scrolled further, connecting the dots. Real estate down payments, wire transfers to an account in Tom's name, digital signatures authorizing fund movement without board approval. All of it tied back to our shared company. Our money. Emily's future. My life's work. The betrayal ran deeper than I thought possible. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was theft. Deception dressed up in marriage and co-ownership. She hadn't just stepped out of our life. She'd started dismantling it from the inside out. I emailed the records to myself, then backed them up to a hard drive I kept in my desk at home. I printed everything and locked it in my car. And then I sat in the driver's seat in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. She'd planned it meticulously. A new life. A clean break. A slow withdrawal so quiet I wouldn't feel it until it was gone. But she miscalculated one thing. I wasn't asleep anymore. The next betrayal came in the form of a password reset email. I'd set up alerts on every shared account the moment I found the transfers. A quiet digital tripwire. So when the notification hit my inbox, password change requested for Emily's 529 college fund, I stopped breathing for a second. It had Melissa's fingerprints all over it. At first, I told myself it had to be a mistake. A technical glitch. Maybe she was just checking the balance. But deep down, I knew better. I logged into the account and felt the floor give out from under me. The beneficiary had been updated. Not to Tom. That would have been absurd, even for her. But to a Michael Everett. A name that didn't exist in our world. No birth date, no relation, no attached school. Just a placeholder, a shadow. A way to mask the change long enough to move the funds. I dug deeper. Found the routing number for the receiving account. Cross-referenced it with the transfers I'd already traced. It was the same one she'd been using to funnel business money, Emmy Holdings. Melissa Lane. Of course. She hadn't even tried to be clever. She just counted on me not looking. She was moving our daughter's future like it was just another box to pack up. The anger didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, like ice, creeping through my chest. I thought I'd already felt the worst of it, the sharp edge of betrayal. But this was different. This was cold. Strategic. She wasn't just leaving. She was rewriting the will, the structure, the scaffolding of our lives. Cutting Emily out of her own future for the sake of a new one that hadn't even been earned. I called Carolyn, my lawyer, that same afternoon. I forwarded her everything. Bank statements. Screenshots. Login records. Her voice on the other end was calm, but taut with concern. "She's not just planning to leave you," Carolyn said. "She's planning to strip you bare before she goes." We initiated a freeze on the 529 account immediately. Carolyn also filed a temporary injunction on any shared assets connected to our business. I was done playing catch-up. That night, I sat beside Emily's bed while she slept, watching her chest rise and fall. I wondered if she'd ever understand the full extent of what her mother had done, or tried to do. Maybe I didn't want her to. Maybe some truths were better left sealed away. But one thing was clear. Melissa had crossed a line. Not just between us. Not just as partners or spouses. But as parents. She wasn't coming back from this. And I wasn't going to let her win. The decision came quietly, without drama or fanfare. Just me, sitting alone in my office at home, staring at a drawer full of documents and realizing I was done waiting for the next blow to land. Melissa had made her moves. Now it was my turn. The first thing I did was change the passwords, every account, every login, every tool she might use to keep her grip on what we built. I locked her out of the business server, the bookkeeping software, our shared cloud drive. It felt like changing the locks on a house that no longer felt like home. I spent the rest of that night sorting through the fireproof box in the bottom drawer. Tax returns, incorporation papers, contracts signed years ago in better times. It was all there. I pulled the originals and stored them in a safe deposit box at the bank first thing the next morning. Melissa had access to too much for too long. That ended now. The lawyer advised me to act with precision. Clean lines, Carolyn had said. No confrontation yet. Just create distance. Quietly. So I did. I pulled my name off joint credit cards. Notified the bank of pending legal proceedings. Froze the college fund. Froze the auxiliary account we used for investments. Everything she might touch, I secured. I even installed a new security system at the house. Separate codes. Separate access. It wasn't just about finances anymore. It was about control, taking back what I'd handed over out of trust, out of love, and realizing how much of that trust she had burned to the ground. Emotionally, I had to be ready too. I started keeping a journal. Not for reflection, not really. For clarity. Every conversation, every strange look, every call she made in hushed tones when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Dates. Times. I wasn't writing to remember, I was writing to build a case. Melissa was still staying at the hospital some nights. Not all. She'd disappear for hours, say she needed to shower, eat, get some air. But I knew she was meeting with Tom. Their messages had quieted, but not disappeared. And the way she looked at me, calculated, always a second too long or too short, told me she felt the shift happening. She knew I was pulling away. She just didn't know how much I'd already taken back. One night, I came home from the hospital and stood in the doorway of our bedroom, staring at the half-empty closet. Her side was still neat, untouched. But her suitcase wasn't in its usual spot. She was already preparing for her exit. What she didn't know was that I was preparing too. Just not the way she expected. The folder felt heavier than paper should. Not because of what it weighed, but because of what it meant. Divorce papers, bank statements, screenshots of messages Melissa had never meant me to see. And tucked between them, a single page handwritten by Emily, a quiet statement of what she'd witnessed, what she'd found. She wanted me to use it. If it helped, it did. It told the truth. Melissa was already in the hospital room when I walked in. She sat by Emily's bedside, one hand resting on our daughter's arm like nothing had changed, like she still had the right. Emily looked up at me, eyes flicking between us. She knew something was coming. I had promised her it wouldn't be loud. I had hoped I could keep that promise. Can we talk outside? I asked Melissa, calm and even. She looked annoyed, like I was interrupting something sacred. But she stood anyway. She followed me to the hallway just outside the room, arms crossed tightly, mouth already tight with suspicion. I handed her the folder without a word. She took it slowly, eyes narrowing as she flipped it open. At first, just confusion. Then the color drained from her face. Her hands trembled as she reached the second section, the messages. The transfers. The changes to Emily's college fund. Her lips parted, and for a second, she looked like she might faint. And then came the scream. High, sharp, and raw. You went through my life? She shrieked, shoving the folder back at me, papers spilling across the floor. You spied on me? In my accounts? Heads turned from down the hall. A nurse froze mid-step. The door to Emily's room cracked open just enough for her to hear everything I hadn't wanted her to. You had no right. Melissa screamed, her voice echoing like it belonged to someone else. This is war, Daniel. I knelt to gather the pages she'd scattered, my hands slow and deliberate. No, I said, standing again. This is consequence. She took a step toward me, eyes wild. You think you can take everything from me? You think I'll let you turn Emily against me? She turned herself, a small voice said. We both looked over. Emily stood in the doorway, pale and unsteady, hospital gown hanging loose from her shoulders. Her voice didn't carry like Melissa's, but it landed harder. I saw the messages, she said. I know what you did. Melissa's face crumpled, her fury breaking into something desperate and ugly. Emily, you don't understand. I do, she whispered. I understand too well. Security arrived moments later, drawn by the noise. One of the nurses pointed, murmuring something into a walkie-talkie. Melissa backed away, protesting, tears now replacing rage. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. For the first time, the truth was louder than her scream. The hallway emptied slowly, like the air itself had to recover from what had just happened. Melissa's screams had stopped, replaced by heavy silence and the low murmur of nurses behind closed doors. Security had escorted her out without resistance after the final warning, her shoulders shaking, her voice broken into stuttered pleas that didn't sound like the woman I had married. Now, it was just me and Emily again. She sat on the edge of her hospital bed, legs dangling, fingers twisting the hem of her blanket. Her face was pale, drawn tight with exhaustion, not just from surgery or painkillers, but from the weight of the truth she shouldn't have had to carry. I sat beside her, slowly, careful not to rush this moment. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She nodded, but didn't look at me. "I think I already knew. I just didn't want it to be real." I exhaled. "I didn't either." For a long time, we said nothing. The machines beeped in rhythm with her heartbeat. A nurse passed by the door and didn't come in. It felt like even the hospital understood we needed space. I told her everything, at least the parts one thought she could hold. I kept my voice calm, steady, but honest. How I found the messages, the money, the account, how long it had been going on, how her mother had tried to take more than just our business. When I told her about the attempt to change the beneficiary on her college fund, something in her face went still. "She wanted a clean slate," I said, my voice thick. "But she wanted it at our expense." Emily blinked fast. "I thought maybe, I don't know, that it was just about love. Or whatever she thought it was." I shook my head. "It stopped being about that the moment she started taking things that didn't belong to her." She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. The tubes and monitors made it awkward, but she didn't care. Neither did I. "You don't have to worry about anything now," I whispered. "We're going to be okay." She didn't speak right away. Just breathed in deep, shaky breaths, like she was letting go of something she'd been holding too long. "I always thought you were too quiet," she said after a while. "But you're the only one who's never lied to me." It hit me harder than I expected. "I won't start now." We sat like that until the sun dipped low behind the blinds. The weight of betrayal still sat in the corner of the room, but between us, there was only clarity. For the first time in a long while, we were exactly where we needed to be, together. The summons came 2 days later, folded neatly in a plain manila envelope dropped at my front door like it was just another piece of mail. Melissa had filed a motion for emergency access to our accounts, citing coercion and unlawful control over shared marital assets. Tom's name was buried in the paperwork too, tied in through one of the shell accounts I had already traced. It was bold, sloppy, even. But it told me one thing: they were scared. And they were desperate. Carolyn wasn't surprised. "They're trying to get ahead of the narrative," she said calmly, flipping through the documents in her office like she'd seen it 1,000 times before. "They'll paint you as controlling, unstable, erratic. That's the script. They're the ones who detonated the whole thing," I said. "I just lit a flashlight under it." She smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "That's why we don't panic, we prepare." By the time the preliminary hearing arrived, we had everything in order. Bank records, digital logs, Melissa's failed password change on Emily's college fund, the messages, the messages, between her and Tom, detailing not just their affair but their plan to isolate me from the business and phase out my role. My favorite line, flagged in red: "Once Emily's out of the way, he won't be paying attention." But the final piece, the one that struck deepest, was the hospital incident. The security footage was clear. Her scream. The physical aggression. My calm response. Emily's fragile voice at the doorway. Carolyn had submitted it as evidence of emotional volatility, undermining Melissa's claim that I posed any threat or was acting irrationally. The judge watched in silence, no expression on her face. Just the glow of the screen playing Melissa's unraveling in real time. Tom didn't show in court. His name came up, of course, linked to fraudulent account activity and manipulated vendor contracts. But he remained invisible, hiding behind attorneys and unsigned affidavits. A ghost with a smirk. Melissa was there, though. Dressed carefully, like a woman trying to be seen as wronged. She didn't look at me once. Not when the footage played. Not when the judge asked about the college fund changes. Not even when Carolyn read aloud the text exchange where she called me a gullible placeholder. Her silence wasn't strength. It was shame pretending to be strategy. The judge recessed without comment, promising a formal ruling within the week. Melissa walked out flanked by her lawyer, chin high, but I saw it, the twitch in her jaw, the tight grip on her bag. The unraveling had already started. This wasn't the clean break she'd imagined. It was a firestorm, and she had lit the match. Now she was trying to outrun the smoke. But I wasn't behind her anymore. I was standing in the clear. Tom always liked to present himself as the steady hand. The calm in the storm. Clients loved him for it, his easy smile, the way he could spin bad news into a strategic opportunity. I used to admire that. I used to think we made a good team, me with the numbers, him with the charm. But charm is brittle when the truth is loud. It started with a quiet email. I sent it to our biggest clients, just a handful of them. The ones who trusted us with their investments for years. No theatrics, no emotional monologue. Just the facts, discrepancies in expense reports, unauthorized vendor payments, falsified approvals. Attached was a link to the audit report I commissioned 2 weeks earlier, the one that laid out, line by line, how Tom had siphoned funds through fake subcontractors and shell accounts Melissa helped set up. It spread fast. Within a day, I was getting calls. First from longtime partners, then from legal. Most of them weren't angry. Not at me. They were quiet. Focused. The way people get when they realize they've been lied to by someone they trusted. Tom tried to stay ahead of it. Sent a statement to the board insisting I was having a personal crisis, that my domestic situation was spilling into company affairs. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The numbers spoke louder than he ever could. By Friday morning, a special board meeting had been called. I walked into the conference room to find Tom already there, seated at the head like he still belonged. His expression was flat, tight around the eyes. A look I'd seen before, when a deal went sideways, when he was cornered and too proud to admit it. They let him speak first. He deflected, blamed. Errors in delegation. Claimed Melissa had mismanaged some of the paperwork while going through personal turmoil. He even tried to paint himself as a victim, said I was weaponizing grief to settle a score. Then it was my turn. I passed out folders, one for each board member. Inside, copies of every transaction tied to Tom's logins, every email approving contracts with non-existent vendors. Screenshots of text messages, redacted where they needed to be. A second audit, this one from a third-party firm. No dramatics. No raised voices. Just receipts. Tom didn't speak after that. Didn't even try. He was voted out unanimously. Effective immediately. His shares frozen pending legal review. I watched him gather his things in silence, the charm drained from his face like someone had pulled the plug. He paused in the doorway, as if expecting me to say something. An apology, maybe. Or some acknowledgement that it didn't have to end this way. But I said nothing. Because when someone burns the bridge, they don't get to choose how far the fire spreads. Emily stood on the auditorium stage in a simple navy dress, her hair tucked behind one ear, the microphone clutched in both hands like it anchored her to the moment. She looked small from where I sat in the third row, but when she began to speak, her voice carried through the room with a quiet force that pulled every eye toward her. I almost didn't write this, she started, her words slow, steady. Because for a while, I didn't know what I wanted to say, or if I had anything worth saying at all. She paused then, and the silence that followed was full, respectful. But I've learned a lot this year. More than I ever expected. About pain. About people. And about myself. I felt my chest tighten. There was a chair beside me reserved for Melissa, still empty. Emily hadn't asked her to come. Hadn't even told her she'd been chosen to speak at the end of your assembly. I didn't press it. I knew why. I was in a car accident a few months ago. Some of you already know that. Some of you don't. She glanced down for a moment, then back up. What most people don't know is what happened afterward. The kind of healing you don't do with stitches or casts. I watched her eyes scan the crowd, not searching for anyone, just grounding herself in the weight of the truth. I learned that sometimes people you trust break your heart. That the adults you think have everything figured out don't. I learned what it means to forgive and what it means not to. There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just clarity. Honesty without apology. I had to ask myself what I'm worth, not just to other people, but to me. And I realized that no one gets to decide that for me. Not even the people who are supposed to love you the most. I swallowed hard. She was 17. She'd been through more than most adults I knew. But she stood there without flinching, without pretending. There was strength in her now that hadn't been there before. Not the kind you're born with, but the kind you forge in fire. I'm not who I was before the accident, she said, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. And I don't want to be. Because the person I am now knows how to fight, how to heal, and how to walk away from what hurts. Applause filled the room as she stepped back from the mic, modest, calm. I didn't clap right away. I just watched her walk off stage, chin high, eyes bright. That was my daughter. Not just surviving. Becoming. The courtroom was cold. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Still. Formal. Every movement echoed louder than it should have. Heels on tile, the rustle of paper, the occasional cough from the gallery. Melissa sat across the aisle in a tailored gray suit, her hair pulled back too tightly, eyes trained on the judge like she could will the verdict into her favor through posture alone. I didn't look at her. Carolyn sat beside me, her expression unreadable, the files in front of her stacked in quiet confidence. We had everything we needed, years of documentation, bank records, the audit trail, the hospital footage. More than enough to unravel the version of reality Melissa had tried to sell. When she took the stand, Melissa spoke carefully. Her voice was composed, even soothing at times, like she was narrating a story where she just happened to be the victim. She called our marriage stifling, said I, weaponized stability, that I was emotionally detached and financially controlling. Her attorney added that the funds she moved were misunderstood, that she was entitled to half as my partner and wife. They tried to paint a picture of quiet suffering, of self-preservation. But facts don't bend under pressure. They just wait. When Carolyn presented the evidence, the forged vendor contracts, the hidden accounts, the attempt to change the beneficiary on Emily's college fund, Melissa's face began to shift. Not dramatically, but the certainty drained from her eyes, like color bleeding from a photograph. She didn't look at me once. Not when Carolyn read aloud the text where she called Emily an obstacle. Not when the judge asked why she failed to disclose her cohabitation with Tom during financial disclosures. And not when the video was played, the hospital hallway, her screaming, Emily's broken voice calling out, the moment she shattered her own credibility. I watched her slowly come to terms with what she'd done, not just to me, but to our daughter. To herself. The judge's ruling came fast. There was no dramatic pause. No raised gavel. Just the firm, final voice of someone who had seen this story unfold too many times to be fooled by dramatics. Full legal and physical custody awarded to me. Melissa granted supervised visitation, pending therapy and review. Business assets returned to my sole ownership. Her petition for joint access denied. Her claims, one by one, dismissed. Melissa sat frozen, lips parted like she'd forgotten how to breathe. As I stood to leave, I glanced at her, not with hatred. Not even with pity. Just clarity. This wasn't vengeance. This was balance returning. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of gray that feels honest. Emily waited in the lobby, her eyes searching mine as I approached. "Well?" she asked. "It's over," I said. She nodded, slipped her hand into mine, and we walked out together. Not just free. Whole. 6 months slipped by quietly, not with the sharpness of endings, but the steady rhythm of beginning again. The house felt different now, lighter, not because anything had changed visually, but because something heavy had finally been carried out. There were still shadows in certain corners, sure, but they no longer stretched across the whole room. The business survived. More than that, it evolved. After the court ruling, I restructured everything, cleaned the slate, brought on 2 new partners I trusted, and rewrote our mission from the ground up. What was once a company solely focused on growth and numbers now had a deeper thread running through it: support, mentorship, purpose. Real legacy. It was Emily's idea to start the foundation. We were sitting on the back porch one evening, watching the sunset bleed into the trees, when she brought it up. "There are a lot of kids like me," she said softly. "Kids who don't know how to talk about what happens when families fall apart. So we built something. The Emily Caldwell Foundation, quietly launched, privately funded, rooted in connection. We partnered with counselors, created scholarships, held workshops. The work was hard and good and honest. Every letter from a teen who said, 'I thought I was alone until now,' reminded me why it mattered." Melissa faded into rumor. After the court ruling, she moved, no one knew where. I heard whispers that she tried to start fresh in another city, but nothing concrete. Tom disappeared just as fast. Word got around that he'd been dropped from 2 boards and quietly replaced in the only venture he had left. He went from the man always in the center of the room to a name people stopped saying out loud. I didn't waste time wondering where they landed. Some wreckage isn't worth revisiting. Emily was thriving. She'd started college early. Scholarship offers came faster than either of us expected. On weekends, she still called me just to talk about the people she'd met, the things she was learning, the things she was still unlearning. Her laugh came easier now. Her eyes were brighter. She was no longer just recovering. She was growing, stretching toward a version of herself that had nothing to do with what she'd been through and everything to do with who she decided to become. One morning, I stood in my office, sunlight cutting through the blinds, and looked at a framed photo of us, Emily and me at the launch of the foundation, arms around each other, the quiet smile of 2 people who had been broken open and rebuilt together. The past hadn't vanished. It had simply stopped holding us hostage. This wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. The room hadn't changed much. Same pale yellow walls, same sterile smell, same hum of machines just waiting to be needed. But this time, Emily sat upright in the hospital bed, swinging her legs, as if the place had never tried to swallow her whole. There were no wires now. No bandages. Just the quiet rhythm of a routine checkup and the soft buzz of a second chance. I sat beside her, the same chair I'd once occupied night after night, praying for something I wasn't sure I deserved. Back then, I'd watched her breathe like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to the world. Now, I watched her talk to the nurse, laugh at a joke, toss her hair over one shoulder like it wasn't a victory just to be here. It felt like stepping into a memory, but one that no longer hurt. She looked over at me once the nurse left, her expression calm, thoughtful. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. And I meant it. "Just strange being back." Emily nodded. "I was thinking that too." I glanced at the corner where Melissa had once screamed, where her voice had cracked open the truth. It felt smaller now. Distant. Like it belonged to someone else's story. "This place saw a lot," I said. Emily didn't speak right away. Then she reached over, found my hand with hers, and squeezed it gently. "You didn't fall apart," she said. "Even when everything did." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were clear. Steady. No trace of the girl I'd once had to carry out of this building in tears. Just a young woman who had stood inside the wreckage and decided to build something better. "I did fall apart," I told her, my voice low. "I just didn't stay there." She smiled. "Still counts." A beat passed, and then she said it, quiet but certain. "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words landed soft but heavy, settling deep in my chest. I didn't know how much I'd needed to hear them until they were there, filling the space left by everything we'd lost. "I'm proud of you too," I said, blinking faster than I wanted to. "More than you know." She leaned her head against my shoulder like she used to when she was small, before everything broke, before we had to learn what surviving actually looked like. We sat that way for a while, not saying much, letting the quiet speak for us. The same room that once felt like the end of everything had become something else entirely. A beginning. And this time, we walked out of it on our own 2 feet, together.